Christian nationalism claims to defend both the cross and the Constitution, but in practice, it betrays both. Let's get it. Hey, welcome back to another episode. This is episode 4 of American Angst Pod. I'm Ryan. If we haven't met yet, I'm glad that you're here with me. I do want to say thank you to everyone who has been supporting. My last video, which was only my 3rd episode, has nearly reached 1,000 views, which is a pretty big deal considering it's just me in my office shooting this on my iPhone, trying to be a voice to whomever I can about the things that I'm feeling about what's happening in politics today. So I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that you're taking time to watch. Please, if you're watching, like and subscribe, share this podcast with friends and family, comment below. I appreciate all the interaction. It helps with the algorithm, helps the channel grow. Who knows where this will go? As you heard in the intro today, we're going to talk a little bit about Christian nationalism. For those of you who don't know, I also am a pastor here locally in my community. I am a volunteer. I work with 3 other co-equal pastors that we just serve our community, try to help people see a better way forward in the ways of Jesus. We pastor an open and affirming church where we believe that all people, no matter where they come from, no matter what their sexuality is, no matter how they identify, every person is worthy of dignity and honor and respect. And so we treat people that way. But today I had kind of busy weekend. So this morning I talked through with our congregation about this idea of unraveling Christian nationalism. And I just want to share it with you here on this channel as well. Now, I was raised an evangelical, at least since the time I was 14 years old. It's been nearly over 30 years now that I have been involved in the evangelical church. It's actually been, 45 years. So I've been in, no, that's not right. I'm only 50. That's funny. I don't do math, at least not in public. Anyways, I've been in evangelical church for quite some time. Let's just put it that way. And did not know that I was being indoctrinated into an ideology of Christian nationalism. It wasn't until about 2008 when Obama was elected, and I began to realize that the declaration that the sky was going to fall if a Democrat was elected really began to fall on deaf ears for me. Like it really began to be like this thing of, you're saying something, but I don't see that happening. And so it really began to create in me this need to look into what is it that we're talking about? Why are we talking about it this way? And what should we do about it? And it was the beginning of this deconstruction of Christian nationalism, American exceptionalism, 2 terms I'm going to use today, that helped me sort of reframe the way I view the world in which I live and the ways in which I vote and the politics or politicians that I personally support and the political ideas that I support now. Fast forward just a little bit further from Obama into about 2015, and when I recognized that the evangelical community, the community that I had been involved with and still am involved with to some degree, was putting all of their support behind Donald Trump, I recognized that everything that I had learned, that this was about the moral majority, this was about ethics, this was about family values, this was about all of these things, was false. And that everything that they were doing was about power. Now, Christian nationalism isn't something that is new. It has been working in the system of our government for quite some time now. I'm not a historian, so I'm not going to give you the entire breakdown of when it first started showing up, but it has been around for quite some time. You've maybe heard the language where we have been referenced to America as the city on a hill, which is a real spiritual language, biblical language being used to sort of baptize America into this sort of sacred nation, if you will, this chosen people. I don't know if you, like me, grew up saying the Pledge of Allegiance in school, but let me start there. So, the Pledge of Allegiance was written originally in 1892, and here was the original Pledge of Allegiance. It said this: I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, in 1923, they rewrote it, or they made some adjustments to that pledge, and it read this way: I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. So they wanted to make it clear that we're not pledging allegiance to just any flag, but we're pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, if you, like me, grew up and went to school, you recognize perhaps something seems to be missing from this. If you were doing it from memory, trying to recite along with me, you're saying you're forgetting something in this. Are you intentionally leaving something out? And the answer is no, I'm not. Because it wasn't until 1954 where the final adjustment of what we now know as the Pledge of Allegiance was made. And this is the one that maybe you and I both remember. And it goes like this: I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And that change was significant. Now, that change in and of itself didn't do much as far as politics go. It doesn't make a big deal. It doesn't have some sort of sweeping like consequence across our nation or in our body of politic. But what it does is it reveals that what has been working behind the scenes, there has been this game plan, this strategy, this ideology called Christian nationalism, and that America, the evangelical church within America, has been trying to tell a story about America as a Christian nation for quite some time. And not just tell the story, but then begin to move into a strategy in making America a Christian nation. And so there are plenty of pseudo historians out there that will try to tell you that America is a Christian nation, or that America was founded on Christian values or on the Bible. And that's just plain, patently false. There is no historical evidence of that being true. Now, not to say that those who founded this country didn't draw in some way, shape, or form some sort of loose ideology or moral clarity from their interpretation of the scriptures or text that they read. But remember, a good portion of these folks owned slaves. They owned people. They treated women as if they were their own possessions in some ways. And so this idea that these were righteous men, that these men were godly men, that all of them sat down and wrote up this sort of founding document based off of the Bible, it's just not a true statement. And there will be others who will say, well, it came from the founding documents of the 13 original colonies. Again, we still come to the same place. It's just not a true statement. America is not a Christian nation, and America has never been a Christian nation. Now, Lee C. Camp, who wrote an incredible book called Scandalous Witness, said this. He said, the notion that the United States could be a Christian nation is bad news for the nation and bad news for Christianity. And I began to think about this. Again, my apologies for those who don't spend much time in the church world. I'm going to take you through a little bit of a church world idea. Again, this is a talk I gave this morning at my church. So bear with me here. I promise you there will be no offerings or altar calls. We're just going to talk about Christian nationalism and the church and how to unravel this idea. So here's the thing, like when you mix faith and politics long enough, you don't get a more faithful politic. And you also don't get a more political faith. What you get is a cult. Or at least you get cult adjacent behaviors. You've probably seen this: unquestioned loyalty, tribal identity, moral inversion, fear disguised as conviction. I mean, just pause there for a moment and think about the current administration and the cult like following that the last decade has given us regarding MAGA and these people who are willing to follow Donald Trump pretty much anywhere he goes. No matter what he says, no matter what he does, they find a way to support a man who is lacking any sort of level of moral clarity, any sort of level of responsibility, any sort of level of leadership. Like, none of these things exist. This man is morally bankrupt. He used to be financially bankrupt in some ways too, but we know that he's grifted off America now, so that's not quite the case of the amount of money that he's taken in from you and me and our tax dollars. But anyways, I'm getting off of the subject here. So you get this cult-like or cult-adjacent behaviors at a minimum. You get a cult, and I think that MAGA is a cult. If you belong, if you've been a part of MAGA, I just want to tell you, like, I'm not saying that to make fun of you. I'm not saying that to mock you. It literally, if you go study cult-like behavior, if you go study cults, it follows in line with a cult. So you get unquestioned loyalty, tribal identity, and mind you, everybody that's in the cabinet for this president and this administration, you see them sit around the table and they all grovel at the feet of Donald Trump. They all talk about how Donald Trump is the greatest thing that's ever happened. They all participate in this sort of like shame ceremony where they have to like give up any sort of sense of self-worth and lay down at the feet of Donald Trump and worship him. I mean, just the other day, Stephen Miller claiming that this country would have been dead if it wasn't for Donald Trump, that he alone saved this nation. That is unquestioned loyalty, tribal identity, moral inversion, fear disguised as conviction. And I think for a lot of us, that's what made this last decade so hard. As we've watched people that we love, our friends, our parents, our mentors, our community members, church members, wherever you might find yourself, slip into a kind of ideological devotion where this faith that is supposed to critique power, instead of critiquing power, now has turned around and blessed it. And this is what made me so angry about the evangelical church attaching themselves as a whole to the MAGA movement, to Donald Trump and his ideologies, is that all of a sudden what people like myself are supposed to do, which is to fight for the poor, to stand up for the marginalized, speak for those who can't speak, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to house the homeless, to visit those in prison, to welcome the immigrant and the stranger. These are all Christian ideas demonstrated by the life of Jesus, that this is what we're supposed to do. Fight for the marginalized. Tear down walls, not build walls, right? All of a sudden, these people, instead of critiquing power, are now blessing power. And where the gospel isn't good news for the poor anymore, it's good news for our side. So we saw the evangelical church say, listen, as long as we can get power for us, then we're okay with anything that this MAGA movement does, that the end justifies the means. And here's the problem. They're using their own interpretations, which are loosely unified, because there is no real univocal interpretation, one clear, precise, certain interpretation of a Bible. So it's how they interpret the Bible. They're using that to make these declarations of what is good news for everybody and how we should move forward. And those fractures, I think, have been brutal for people. Even if you're outside of the faith community, which is fine. If you're outside the faith community, you probably also have experienced some of these fractures of maybe even having parents or friends or family that all of a sudden became sort of pseudo-spiritual, like it all of a sudden became sort of this weird religious thing because they were following this cult of Donald Trump and MAGA. Um, Anyways, those fractures I think have been brutal. Like you probably have experienced family dinners turning into big fights and battlefields. I personally have experienced churches splitting or closing down over this, lifelong friends who stopped calling. And here's the reason why: when faith and politics become fused together, every disagreement feels like heresy, and every question sounds like betrayal. So I want to say this very clearly. Like, I believe this. I'm going to say this with 10 toes down, standing on business on this. Christian nationalism claims to defend both the cross and the Constitution, but in practice, it betrays them both. Now, let's define a couple of terms here. First, let's define the idea of American exceptionalism, because undergirding all of this is this thing that all of us who are Americans have been taught, and that is American exceptionalism. Like from the time we start going to school, being taught the Pledge of Allegiance even is a part of this idea of American exceptionalism. And that is this the idea that the U.S. is uniquely virtuous, chosen, or destined to lead morally and politically, and therefore above typical national constraints. Like, it's this idea that we're better than the rest, that we have been chosen, that we have been set apart, that we have a virtue that's beyond reproach, right? And while I can understand that some people would think that about, some evangelicals would think that about Israel because Israel is mentioned in the Bible. Now, they're confusing the fact that the Israel of the Bible is a people group. It is not a nation state, and those are two different things. And we're not going to get into the depths of that, but they're not the same thing. The nation of Israel, as we know it today, is not the same Israel that the Bible talks about, although they share a name. And although they share a region and there are people that might move back and forth between the two, they're not the same thing. America is not in the Bible. So it is crazy to think that America has set itself up as being basically a twin to Israel, meaning a nation that is virtuous, a nation that is chosen, a nation that is set apart, a nation that is holy, a nation that is above reproach, a nation that every other nation should look to and be like, we want to be like them. So American exceptionalism sort of sets this idea, and it starts when we're young, like this whole idea of God bless America, the songs that we sing, the pledges that we make, the way that we are taught history. It begins to set this precedence of the exceptionalism of America. And then right alongside that is this idea of Christian nationalism. Now, Christian nationalism is the belief that the nation is fundamentally Christian, that its laws and identity should reflect, listen to this, a particular form of Christianity, and that Christian identity must have public and political priority. Now, I am a Jesus follower. I am a Christian. I've been a part of the evangelical church for a long time, as I said earlier. I wholeheartedly reject that idea. There is not one part of the Bible that teaches that because we follow Jesus, that we should have power and dictate to everyone else their morals or what should be their political priorities or their public priorities, that their lives should reflect what my convictions are. That's not in the Bible. But these two ideas, American exceptionalism and Christian nationalism, they overlap. Exceptionalism supplies this sort of story for us that builds out this like, oh, we are chosen, we are so special, and then the scary part is that Christian nationalism supplies the strategy for the story. Because we are so chosen, because we are so special, we must seize control and shape the state accordingly. Now, I didn't go into this morning, and I'm not going to necessarily go into it in full detail here. But if you want to dig a little bit deeper into this, go look up the Seven Mountain Mandate. That's what it's called. Seven Mountain Mandate. You can Google that. I'll see if I can drop some links below about this. But this is sort of a driving force of the evangelical party in regards to Christian nationalism. And that is this idea that there are 7 spheres of influence: government, education, the arts, so on and so forth, 7 of them, that Christians need to conquer. They need to have quote unquote dominion over the 7 mandate, mountain mandate. And the mandate is that these 7 mountains need to be conquered, and we need to have dominion over these areas of public and the public sphere so that we can essentially control them. They would say influence, but the reality is it's control. And so that's the idea. These two, the exceptionalism provides this story, this like, oh, our founding. Look how providential it was. Look how much God was involved. We got images of George Washington kneeling at Valley Forge in the middle of the winter, praying to God for direction as they're fighting this battle. And that never happened. There's no real historical proof that ever happened. But the painting has become famous that people actually believe that General George Washington was praying to God in the middle of Valley Forge. It's just using this imagery. It's propaganda for American exceptionalism. And then Christian nationalism comes along and says, I see your American exceptionalism. Let me give you a strategy on how to execute these ideas in ways in which we can seize control of the politic and shape the state according to these Christian ideals. Hope you're following along. So I'm going to posit to you today that Christian nationalism is fundamentally anti-American and fundamentally anti-Christian. Okay, let me say it one more time. Christian nationalism is fundamentally anti-American and fundamentally anti-Christian. Christian nationalism doesn't just misuse religion, it undermines the very 2 ideas it says it protects. We're talking about the cross and the Constitution. It undermines the American experiment, which is supposed to be about pluralism and liberty. And it undermines the Christian gospel, which is supposed to be about humility and presence and love of neighbor, love of enemy even. Christian nationalism undermines both of those ideas. So let's talk about it. The first thing, anti-American. Christian nationalism is fundamentally anti-American. The framers, the founders, however you want to say it, the fathers of the Constitution, even the most devout ones, explicitly rejected a state church. They were opposed to a state-run or state-sanctioned church. Remember, we fought a war to leave one. We didn't want a monarch, we didn't want a king, and we didn't want a state-run church. And so we literally fought a battle to liberate ourselves from that very thing. But let's hear from their words. James Madison, who is the author of the majority of the Bill of Rights, said this: the religion of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man. The religion of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man. Saying clearly that religion for each person is their own personal decision and choice and journey. Whether they want to have a religion or don't want to have a religion, it's to be left to that person's conscience to determine whether they will or will not have a religion, whether they will or will not worship. Thomas Jefferson said this: our civil rights have no dependence on our religious opinions any more than our opinions in physics or geometry. Again, our civil rights have no dependence on our religious opinions any more than our opinions in physics, in geometry. So he's just saying there's just no place for it in our civics, our civil rights. There's no place for a forced religion into our civil liberties, just like there's no place for our religious opinions in geometry. There's no place for our religious opinions in physics. Physics are physics, whether you believe it or not. You can have a spiritual idea or a belief system that says that gravity is not real. But listen to me, brother. Gravity is real, and your belief system should play no role in the reality of physics. So, the framers and the founders, and this is just a few. You can. There are so many quotes out there that are available. When I was putting together this talk, probably 30, 40 different quotes that I could bring to you from the founders of our country, from people who've studied Christian nationalism and the founding of our country. There's so many different resources available. I'm only giving you a few because I have limited time here. What else? Anti-American, fundamentally anti-American. Well, let's talk about the Establishment Clause, which is found in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, right? The Establishment and a Free Exercise Clause. Here's what it says. Again, First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, again, mostly written by James Madison, said this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So what this is saying is the right to worship or the right not to worship is yours without state interference. That every single person has the right to worship whomever or whatever they wish to worship, or the right to not worship anything at all, and that the state has no right to interfere with that. It's the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Period. End of story. Like, it cannot be any more clear than that. These were the founders of our nation. These were the things that they believed, and they enshrined it in the Bill of Rights. They wrote that shit down. Now, Christian nationalism turns freedom of democracy into a rule of theocracy. So Christian nationalism wants to take this idea of like the Establishment Clause, where Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And Christian nationalism wants to say, no, 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 no. We want this to be a theocracy. So we're going to actually establish a state religion. And listen, you're free to leave the state if you'd like. You're free to leave the nation if you're like. But we are going to establish laws. We're going to establish worship. We're going to establish orders. We're going to establish this all based upon the Bible. And really, a white man's interpretation of the Bible. If we're being serious. If we're being honest here, American exceptionalism and Christian nationalism is rooted in white Christian nationalism for men. If we're going to be honest, this is the base of it. The power structure was designed for white, straight men to have power, to hold power, to never let power go. And that has been the intention of Christian nationalism, to bring us back to this idea of white men ruling. So Christian nationalism turns freedom of democracy into the rule of theocracy. Theocracy meaning being ruled by God, theos being God. And the American experiment, as maybe you've heard this before, the American experiment is built on shared citizenship, not shared creed. And listen, I can hear some of you already being like, yes, shared citizenship. Are you a legal citizen? That's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about shared citizenship, we're talking about community. We're talking about people living in proximity with one another. We're not talking about some arbitrary borders that were drawn up by powerful people and some arbitrary documents that were established by these powerful people to keep people out or to keep people in or to control people. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this proximity of community of people. And the American experiment is built on a shared citizenship, a shared community of proximity. That we're in this together, that you're my neighbor, that I care for you because you're my neighbor. Not a shared creed, not this declaration of I believe X, Y, and Z, and you need to believe X, Y, and Z too, or you have to leave. Christian nationalism flips this idea of we the people into we the believers, and that is a problem. Now, I said that Christian nationalism is fundamentally anti-American, But it is also, even though it says Christian nationalism, it is fundamentally anti-Christian. Christian nationalism worships power, not the cross. And here's the thing, the defining emblem of Christianity, if you will, is the cross, or what we would call the cruciform love, meaning this willingness to lay one's life down for another. So if you're not familiar with Christian language, the cross is supposed to represent the idea that Jesus, who was God, and again, you may not believe that, and that's okay. I'm just telling you what the Bible, what evangelical people think. Let's say it that way. That Jesus, who was God, came and lived and did no wrong and healed the sick and fed the hungry and clothed the naked and cared for the poor and visited those who were imprisoned and welcomed strangers. All of these beautiful things, that Jesus did these things. And because he did these things, the people who were in power, Rome, crucified Jesus. They hung him on a cross, but he was supposed to be God. And so the story goes that, well, he could have called down angels. If he's God, he could have changed this. If he's all powerful, he could have wrote the story differently, but he didn't. He laid down his life on a cross. And so the cross is supposed to be this image of self-sacrificial love, this willingness to say, because I deeply care for you, I will lay down my own life. I will lay down my own desires. I will lay down my own will in service to you, my neighbor. That's what's supposed to happen in the Christian faith. But Christian nationalism worships power, not the cross. It trades cruciform love for cultural conquest. Or maybe you've heard it this way, for culture wars. Now, Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead, who are sociologists and historians, said in their book, Taking America Back for God, said, Christian nationalism is not about loving your neighbor. It's about power for my group. It's about power for my group. Now, think about this in regards to the life of Jesus, and maybe you're not familiar with the Bible stories, and again, that's totally fine. I'm not trying to offend anybody about my interpretation of the Bible stories, but Jesus's life in the Bible stands in direct opposition to this idea of political power. Jesus was born in poverty, in a manger. You've probably heard at Christmas time, away in a manger, no crib for his bed, the little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head, right? This whole idea is about this impoverished child coming to this virgin woman, Mary. When Jesus was born, Herod put out this decree that all of these children would be murdered. This genocide of all of these children would happen because he heard there was a king that was born. And so what happens? Joseph and Mary flee to Egypt with Jesus. So Jesus becomes a refugee. Now, again, we're talking about if Jesus was actually God coming down and the actual desire or goal of Jesus was conquest and power, political power in particular, this is all wrong then. That Jesus comes down into poverty as a refugee, follows the footsteps of his father Joseph as a carpenter, moves on. He's from Nazareth, and the Bible makes this sort of declaration of like, can anything good come from Nazareth? Is sort of talking about like, this is the low lives. These are the people. There's nothing really happening in Nazareth that's worthwhile. People aren't rich. People aren't wealthy. People aren't powerful. They're just Nazarites. Can anything good come from Nazareth? Then he's like, he takes on his father's work as a carpenter. He's from Nazareth. He becomes a rabbi. And then he rides into Jerusalem on the week that he will be executed on a donkey, not on a war horse. A donkey is an animal of peace in those days. It would be understood as he was riding in on a donkey that he comes in peace, not for war or conflict. And that um, and then again, the cruciform life. He lays down his life. That he demonstrates that he is incarnate, that he's God in the flesh, that his presence was there for all people. He was not there for power. He was there to walk among us, to be one of us, to feel what we feel, to know what we know, to hurt the way that we hurt. Those kind of things. You follow me? If Jesus's desire was this sort of political power and conquest, this would have been a completely different story. I mean, you've read the stories of gods who visit the earth and like they come in power and they're strong and they're mighty and they all of these sort of things. Like Jesus would have showed up like just jacked, wealthy, rich, probably wouldn't have been born of a virgin. Like, dude, if you are all powerful God, just show up. Like, just come like an alien out of the sky, just fall down like from a meteor or something, just wildly crazy, like demonstrates that you are this omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient God, like that you are all powerful, right? And show up with weapons that they've never even seen before. Like they're out there fighting with swords and you roll in with like, some legit war fighting, right? If you wanted to come as a warrior to conquer, then it would have been a different story. Born to a wealthy family, perhaps. Instead of being a carpenter or a rabbi, you begin to train as a warrior, you lead as a general, all of these sort of things, which is what Israel was expecting. Israel was expecting a warrior to come overthrow Rome on their behalf. They had been under the rule of Rome for quite some time at this point, and they were hoping that there would be another that would come that would lead an insurrection against Rome and lead them into freedom and liberty once again. So they wanted Jesus to be this guy. Jesus doesn't show up that way. Sorry, I got a little ranty there. But that's like, if that's what he wanted, if he wanted power, this is what he would have done. But he didn't want power. He wanted presence. He wanted to be among us. The Christian nationalism fights to preserve a particular kind of like quote unquote social order. And again, that social order is that straight white men have the power, period. And that everyone knows their place. I mean, you've probably seen the Doug Wilsons and the interviews that have been going sort of public with. Doug Wilson is actually Pete Hegseth's pastor, and people within that milieu of pastors making this declaration that, oh, we want to go back to like a household vote where there's only one vote per household. And then of course it's like, well, what if the partners, the wife and the husband disagree on what the vote will be? Well, I mean, the Bible says that the husband's the head of the household. So, I mean, it's pretty clear, biblically speaking, the husband has the final say on what happens, what vote is cast. Like that's what I'm saying. This is what they want. That's what Christian nationalism does, right? Everybody knows their place. There's a social order they're trying to bring us back to. And Jesus comes and he upends that social order. Remember, I'm on this point that Christian nationalism is fundamentally anti-Christian. Jesus upends the social order. If you want to see how Jesus upends the social order, go read the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the meek. The Beatitudes are all of these statements of people who did not have access to power and didn't have privilege. And Jesus shows up, and in his first sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, he begins to make a declaration that upends these power structures and says, you think that the powerful are blessed. You think that the wealthy are blessed. You think that the privileged are blessed. I'm telling you the meek. I'm telling you that the poor. I'm telling you that the peacemakers. These are the people that are blessed. It's completely upside down to what they expected. And Christian nationalism confuses nation with kingdom. And in so doing, inevitably baptizes and blesses state atrocities as the will of God. Let me say that again. Christian nationalism confuses nation with this idea of the Christian kingdom. Jesus taught us to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And what Christian nationalism does is it confuses the nation of America in particular with this idea of the kingdom of God. And in so doing, inevitably baptizes and blesses state atrocities as the will of God. This is the sort of idea that you can get when Just think about it. It's not that long ago that Israel themselves experienced one of the greatest genocides ever leveled against humanity. And now Israel themselves is leveling genocide against the Palestinians. How do you get there? Through Christian nationalism. If you claim that God is on your side, that you are chosen by God, then you can do whatever it is you need to do to rule and reign, because the end justifies the means. And Christian nationalism confuses nation with kingdom, and in so doing, inevitably baptizes and blesses state atrocities as the will of God. Now, our current government is being led by a group of Christian nationalists. Behind the scenes, it used to be back in the day the moral majority, the religious right, all of these sort of ideas that were starting to come together when the Pledge of Allegiance was changed. That was part of that movement to add one nation under God. It was this move to sort of commercialize the cross, if you will, to use the cross as a stamp of approval on their capitalism. Why? Because those Soviets over there, those godless Soviets over there, we can't be communists. And so we're going to be set apart. We're going to be Christians. We're going to be a Christian nation. And they started trying to commercialize the cross for corporate America, for all of these ideas of America. So they did things like adding one nation under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. Around the same time, they took the motto that was on our money, that was like e pluribus unum. I'm not sure if I'm saying that properly, but out of many, one. And instead of it, they removed that and put "In God We Trust" on our money. Like, it was all an intention of Christian nationalism trying to bring the nation state under this sort of theocratic rule. And it has been a long game that they have been playing. Organizations like Turning Point USA, like the Heritage Foundation. Which Heritage Foundation are we talking? What heritage are we referring to when we're talking about the Heritage Foundation, by the way? The Heritage Foundation. These sort of groups, Wall Builders International, which is sort of pseudo-history group. All of these people have been working together. The new Apostolic Reformation, NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation. This is mostly in the evangelical world. They're the ones that kind of came up with the Seven Mountain Mandate. These folks have all been working to try to create this Christian nation, this theocratic nation. And what we have now in our administration is that people like Pete Hegseth have made their way all the way to the top. People like Russell Vogt, who's basically the shadow president behind the scenes, making decisions, unelected, making decisions. All of these people subscribe to this idea of Christian nationalism. And they're using Christian language to justify the activities and actions that they're doing. That God chose Trump. That God saved Trump for this purpose. That God is using Trump. Oh, he might be crass. Oh, he might say some bad jokes or troll some people. But the reality is God is using him to make America great again. What do they mean by make America great again? What they mean is that America is ruled by rich, white, straight, or at least they might be closeted. I think some of them are closeted, but straight men. And everybody else fall in line. Lacey Camp, again, in his book Scandalous Witness, said the gospel does not need the sword of the state. So Christian nationalism is fundamentally anti-American. Christian nationalism is fundamentally anti-Christian. Christian nationalism claims to defend both the cross and the Constitution, but in practice, it betrays them both. I imagine that you, like me, can think of a lot of atrocities that this administration is leveling against humanity, against our neighbors. And it angers me to no end. The rage that I feel about the things that they are doing to people. under the name or under the banner of Christian ideologies, it makes me angry. And that's why I do this podcast. Part of the reason why I do this is because I need a place. I am an angsty person. I've said this, and I need a place to talk about, to walk through, to process verbally what I am seeing and what is happening. And if I can, in some way, shape, or form, help somebody else see a little bit about what this is and what's happening, bring a little bit of perspective maybe that you didn't have before about what's going on. But I'm going to leave it there. That is the talk that I gave this morning at my church. Probably made some people mad. Don't really, I mean, that's not my intention, obviously. I'm trying to help people be educated about some things. You might have some thoughts about Christian nationalism, about the founding of our nation, about all of these sort of ideas. Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. But that's where we're going to leave it. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week.